The unexpected change. The sterile scent of disinfectant filled the air as Captain Ethan Carter lay on the medical bay bed, his arm wrapped in a healing cast. The sharp white lights above flickered softly, casting a faint glow on the smooth metal walls. The Deep Space Medical Station was quiet, apart from the occasional beeping of the monitoring machines. Ethan had been stationed here for 2 weeks, recovering from a minor accident during a maintenance check on his ship, the Orion's Edge. He hated being stuck in one place, but his alien nurse, Zilara, made the stay bearable. Zilara belonged to the Veltheri, a highly advanced alien species known for their medical knowledge. Unlike humans, her body was covered in smooth blue skin, and her silver eyes always carried a sense of calm and control. She was always professional, cold, efficient, and logical. But today, something was different. Ethan first noticed it when she entered the room. Her posture was stiff, and her breathing was heavier than usual. The soft hum of her biomechanical uniform, which usually adjusted to her temperature, was now flickering erratically. "Are you okay?" Ethan asked, pushing himself up on the bed. Zilara didn't answer immediately. Instead, she avoided his gaze, her silver eyes flickering gold for a brief moment. That had never happened before. "I am fine," she finally said, but there was a strange edge to her voice. Ethan frowned. Zilara never hesitated. She never looked nervous. But now, her usually graceful movements seemed tense, almost unnatural. Before he could say anything, the room's temperature control system suddenly malfunctioned, causing a wave of warmth to spread through the medical bay. Zilara flinched, gripping the nearby table as her breathing became uneven. "Something is wrong," Ethan said, sitting up straight. "I said I am fine," Zilara snapped, her voice sharper than usual. Ethan was taken aback. Zilara never snapped. Ever. She turned away from him, but not before he noticed something shocking. Her blue skin was slowly turning violet. "What the hell?" Ethan muttered. Zilara grabbed a medical scanner and tried to steady herself, but her fingers shook as she activated it. "I need you to leave," she said quickly. Ethan narrowed his eyes. "Not happening. You look like you're about to pass out. I should be calling someone, not leaving you alone." "No," she snapped again. She took a deep breath, as if trying to control something deep inside her. For the first time, Ethan noticed a strange, low vibration in the air, like an invisible energy pulse radiating from her body. The lights above flickered again, and the machines monitoring his health started displaying erratic readings. "Zilara, tell me what's going on," Ethan demanded. She clenched her jaw. "I cannot." Ethan got off the bed, ignoring the dull ache in his arm. He stepped closer, but the moment he did, Zilara flinched backward as if he was dangerous. That's when he realized the truth. "This isn't some random sickness, is it?" he asked, his voice low. Zilara's hands tightened into fists. The golden flicker in her eyes grew stronger, and her breathing became heavier. "No," she admitted finally. Ethan's stomach dropped. Whatever was happening, it was serious. Zilara shut her eyes tightly, as if in pain. When she spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. "It's my cycle." Ethan blinked. "Your cycle?" She took a slow breath, as if trying to hold back something dangerous. "My mating season has begun." For a moment, the words didn't make sense. Mating season. And then it hit him. Ethan's eyes widened. "Wait, what? You mean?" Zilara nodded stiffly. "Yes, and there is a problem." Ethan didn't like the sound of that. What kind of problem? She finally met his gaze, and this time, her golden eyes glowed like burning embers. "My body has identified you as a compatible mate." Silence. Ethan's mind froze. His pulse spiked. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Zilara turned away, gripping the edge of the medical console so tightly that her sharp nails cut into the metal. This should not have happened. Velfari and humans are not supposed to be genetically compatible. Ethan felt like his brain was breaking. But we're not. I mean, I'm human. You're. Zilara took a shaky breath, and when she spoke, there was a hint of something Ethan had never heard from her before. Fear. If I do not find a mate soon, I will not survive. Ethan's chest tightened. She was serious. The lights flickered wildly, and the vibrating energy in the air grew stronger. Ethan stepped back instinctively. His heart pounded. His mind raced. This wasn't just some alien biology thing. This was a life-or-death situation, and for some reason, he was in the middle of it. The revelation. Ethan Carter stood frozen, his heartbeat pounding in his ears. His mind struggled to process what he had just heard. If I do not find a mate soon, I will not survive. Zilara's words echoed in his head, sending a chill down his spine. The medical bay felt smaller, the walls closer than before. His instincts screamed at him to get out to run. But he didn't. He couldn't. Zilara was still gripping the edge of the medical console, her sharp nails cutting into the metal as if she was holding back something violent inside her. Her breathing was ragged, her golden eyes burning like twin stars. Ethan took a slow, careful step back. You're telling me you actually need to. He couldn't even finish the sentence. Zilara shut her eyes tightly, her body trembling. Yes, but I am resisting it. I will not force this on you. Her voice was tight, controlled, but there was something else there. Pain, desperation, fear. Ethan exhaled sharply, running a hand through his short-cropped brown hair. Okay, all right. Let's just slow down and figure this out, all right? Zilara gave a short, bitter laugh. There is nothing to figure out. This is biology, Ethan. It does not listen to logic. He stared at her, studying her face. She had always been composed, unshakable, like an unbreakable piece of ice. But now she was melting. Her skin, once cool blue, was now a deep, unsettling violet. Her normally graceful, measured movements had become jerky and unpredictable. And the air around her was charged with some kind of invisible force, a pulse of energy he could feel in his bones. Ethan wasn't a scientist, but he knew one thing for sure. This was bad. Look, he said, trying to keep his voice steady. There has to be a way to fix this without. He stopped, not sure how to phrase it. Zilara's expression darkened. There is no fixing it, Ethan. My species enters a mating cycle once in our lifespan. Once. And when it starts, it cannot be reversed. Ethan swallowed. And if it's not? Completed. Zilara's fingers dug deeper into the console. The metal groaned under her grip. I die, she whispered. Ethan felt his stomach drop. A cold silence filled the room. His mind reeled. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. He was just here to heal up and get back to his mission. How the hell had he gotten caught up in some alien life or death biology crisis? But then he looked at her, really looked at her. Beneath the glowing eyes and the trembling frame, she was scared. And Ethan had never seen Zilara afraid of anything. She was fighting it. Fighting something deep inside her, something that was trying to take control. And suddenly, Ethan realized, this wasn't just a crisis for her. This was hell. She didn't want this. She didn't want to be like this. Ethan sighed, rubbing his face. Okay, we need a plan. Zilara exhaled sharply. There is no. No, listen to me, Ethan cut in. I am not going to let you die. That is not an option. So there has to be another way. Zilara hesitated, her gaze flickering. There is one possibility. Ethan latched onto it instantly. Okay, great. What is it? She hesitated, then said, the neural bond. Ethan frowned. The what now? Zilara finally released the console and turned to face him fully. The air around her hummed, like a storm about to break. A neural bond is a temporary mental connection, she explained. It allows my species to synchronize thoughts and emotions with another being. It is used in emergencies when a mate is not present. Ethan raised an eyebrow. And you didn't lead with this because... Zilara's lips pressed into a thin line. Because it is dangerous. The process is not meant for humans. If I attempt to link with you, it could damage your mind. Maybe permanently. Ethan let out a slow breath. Right. Of course. Because this situation wasn't bad enough already. A violent shudder ran through Zilara's body. She stumbled, catching herself against the console again. Ethan instinctively reached out to steady her. The second his fingers touched her arm, a bolt of energy shot through his body. His vision blurred. The room tilted. His mind exploded with images, memories, sensations that weren't his. A vast alien sky, filled with burning twin suns. A deep sense of loneliness stretching across decades. A desperate, aching need for connection. And beneath it all, the terrifying, all-consuming hunger. Ethan snatched his hand back, gasping for air. His knees nearly buckled. Zilara was staring at him with wide, horrified eyes. You, she whispered, her voice trembling. You felt it. Ethan barely managed a nod. His head was pounding. What the hell was that? He asked, his voice hoarse. Zilara swallowed. The bond is already trying to form. Ethan wiped his face, trying to regain control of his thoughts. This was beyond anything he had ever dealt with. He was a soldier, an explorer, not an expert in alien mating rituals. But one thing was clear. If they didn't do something soon, Zilara was going to die. And considering what he had just felt, he might not survive either. He took a deep breath and looked at her. All right, he said finally. Tell me how we do this. Zilara's golden eyes blazed. And then the station alarms started blaring. A desperate situation. The blaring station alarms echoed through the medical bay, the red emergency lights casting a warning glow over the metallic walls. Ethan Carter snapped his head up, his pulse spiking. His instincts, honed by years in the United Earth Space Corps, kicked in immediately. What the hell now? He muttered. Zilara's glowing golden eyes flickered with alarm as she turned toward the console. Despite the agony coursing through her body, she forced herself to move, her fingers swiftly tapping on the holographic controls. The screen flashed, revealing a station-wide security alert. Medical Bay emergency lockdown activated. Unidentified biological disturbance detected. Security forces en route. Ethan's stomach dropped. Security. That meant only one thing. The station's AI had picked up on Zilara's condition and flagged it as a biological threat. Zilara's breathing quickened, her violet skin darkening further. She turned to Ethan, her voice sharp. They must have detected my energy fluctuations. Ethan gritted his teeth. Let me guess. This is bad. Zilara clenched her jaw, her fingers tightening around the edge of the console. If they realize what's happening to me, they may classify me as a risk to the crew. I could be. She hesitated, struggling to say the words. Ethan's eyes hardened. You could be what? Zilara looked away. Terminated. The word hit Ethan like a punch to the chest. Wait. Are you serious? Terminated. His voice was rising now, anger bubbling up inside him. Zilara nodded stiffly, her glowing gaze haunted. Veltheri mating cycles are extremely rare. There are no known human-compatible cases. They will assume I am a danger and eliminate the problem. Ethan ran a hand through his hair. That's insane. You're not hurting anyone. Zilara exhaled, her body trembling. They will not take that risk. Ethan cursed under his breath. His mind raced, searching for a solution. The security teams would be here in minutes. He had two options. One, let them take Zilara and risk her being executed. Two, stop them, which would make him an enemy of the station. Neither option was good. Zilara swayed slightly, gripping the console for balance. Her golden eyes burned into his. Ethan, I do not want to die. That was it. That single sentence made his decision for him. He stepped forward, planting himself firmly in front of her. His voice was calm but firm. "Then we don't let them take you." Zilara's eyes widened slightly. "You would fight your own kind. For me." Ethan let out a dry laugh. "Hell, I don't even know what I'm doing anymore, but I know I don't let my friends die. And right now, you're in trouble." Zilara looked at him, something unreadable flickering across her face. "Thank you." But there was no time for emotion. They had to move. The escape plan. Ethan rushed to the emergency storage cabinet, yanking it open. Inside, he found a small stash of medical-grade sedatives, adrenaline injectors, and surgical tools. Zilara glanced at him. "What are you doing?" Ethan held up a small metal cylinder. This is going to buy us time." Zilara frowned. "That is an anesthetic gas disperser." Ethan smirked. "Yeah, and in about 30 seconds, it's going to put everyone outside that door to sleep." Zilara's eyebrows lifted slightly. "That might actually work." Ethan placed the device near the ventilation system, adjusting the dosage. "You need to tell me how long we have until your condition gets worse." Zilara hesitated. "Hours, maybe less. The neural bond is the only way to stabilize me for now." Ethan's fingers froze over the controls. "Right, that thing where we share thoughts and feelings." Zilara nodded solemnly. "Yes, but there is a risk. If the process goes wrong, our minds could merge permanently." Ethan grimaced. "Great, so we either get mind-melded forever, or you die. Loving the options here." Zilara's breath hitched and her body shook slightly. "We do not have time to debate this, Ethan." The sound of boots clanking in the hallway made his decision easier. Security was here. Ethan activated the gas disperser. A soft hiss filled the air. Seconds later, a muffled voice came from behind the locked door. "Medical Bay, this is security. Unlock the door immediately." Ethan grinned. "Yeah, give that about 10 seconds." A loud clang followed as someone tried to force the door open. Then, thud. Then another. Then silence. Zilara stared at him. It worked. Ethan shrugged. "Told you." Zilara took a deep breath, her skin flickering between violet and deep purple. Her control was slipping. "Ethan, we must do the bond now." He hesitated. Zilara stepped forward, gripping his wrist. The second she touched him, a pulse of energy shot through his body. Visions slammed into his mind. A burning desert under twin moons. A deep, aching loneliness that had lasted centuries. The feeling of losing control. Ethan gasped, his vision spinning. He stumbled back, but Zilara held on, her golden eyes locked onto his. "I do not wish to harm you, Ethan, but if we do not do this now, I will lose myself. And when that happens, I will become something neither of us can stop." Ethan swallowed hard. This was it. No turning back. His chest rose and fell as he exhaled slowly. "All right, Zilara. Do it." Her eyes blazed like twin suns. She placed her hands on either side of his head, and the world exploded into light. Escape or accept. A surge of raw energy shot through Ethan's mind as Zilara's fingers pressed against his temples. His vision blurred, the world around him twisting into a whirlwind of colors and sensations. It was like being sucked into a vortex. One moment he was standing in the medical bay. The next, he was floating in an endless void of swirling stars. And then the memories hit him. A burning desert under twin moons. A deep blue ocean stretching into infinity. A crushing loneliness, heavy as gravity itself. Zilara's emotions flooded into him like a tidal wave, overwhelming, uncontrollable. He could feel her fear, her pain, her desperation. It wasn't just about her survival. This was about losing herself completely. Ethan gasped, struggling to pull back, but the bond was too strong. Zilara's voice echoed in his head. "I cannot stop it, Ethan. You are inside my mind now." The words weren't spoken aloud, They reverberated through his consciousness, as if his very thoughts had been hijacked. Ethan tried to focus, tried to hold on to his identity, but the sheer force of Zilara's presence was too much. It felt like he was drowning in another person's soul. He clenched his fists, gritting his teeth. "Zilara, listen to me. You have to control it." "I can't." His breath caught as his mind was suddenly yanked into a new memory. Inside Zilara's mind, the burning sky stretched endlessly above, twin suns bleeding orange light over the horizon. Ethan stood on a vast Veltheri desert, golden sand shifting beneath his feet. The air was thick with heat and longing, the very atmosphere humming with the same pulsating energy he had felt around Zilara in the medical bay. In front of him stood a small child, her smooth blue skin glowing softly under the twin suns. Zilara. But she was young, just a child, no more than 10 human years old. She stood alone in the endless desert, her silver eyes staring at the sky. Ethan could feel her emotions as if they were his own. Loneliness, isolation, rejection. She had never been like the others. The Veltheri were a species that thrived on connection, on merging their minds through the neural bond. But Zilara, she had never bonded with anyone. She was different. She was alone. Ethan's breath hitched. He could feel it, the deep, aching need for something she had never had. Belonging, understanding. And then, suddenly, she turned. Zilara's younger self looked straight at him, her silver eyes boring into his. "You are not supposed to be here." The desert vanished. Back to reality. Ethan's eyes snapped open, his body jerking as the neural bond shattered like glass. He stumbled backward, gasping for air, his pulse thundering in his chest. The medical bay spun around him as his brain struggled to process what had just happened. Zilara staggered as well, clutching her head. Her violet skin flickered between deep purple and blue, as if the process had disrupted something inside her. She looked at him, wide-eyed, shaken. "Ethan," she whispered. He took a deep breath, still trying to steady himself. "What the hell was that?" She swallowed hard. "You saw my past." He nodded slowly. "Yeah, and it wasn't exactly a fun ride." Zilara looked away, her golden eyes dimming slightly. "I did not expect you to be pulled that deeply into the connection." Ethan rubbed his temples. "Yeah, neither did I." He exhaled sharply. "Zilara, why didn't you tell me about all of that?" She hesitated, her posture stiff. "Because it does not matter." Ethan frowned. "The hell it doesn't. You've been alone your entire life, haven't you?" Zilara flinched, her fingers tightening into fists. Ethan sighed. "Zilara, I get it now. This isn't just about survival for you. This is about finally connecting with someone, isn't it?" Her jaw tightened. She didn't answer. But she didn't need to. For the first time since this nightmare started, Ethan understood. This was not just biology. This was her deepest fear, her deepest need. And for some damn reason, he was the only one who could fix it. He ran a hand through his hair. "So, what now?" Zilara took a shaky breath. "The bond is incomplete. It stabilized me, but not fully. We have little time before it collapses." Ethan stiffened. "And if it collapses?" Her gaze met his, dark and serious. "I will lose control." His stomach tightened. That wasn't an option. Before he could respond, the station intercom crackled to life. "Warning. Unauthorized gas dispersal detected in medical bay. Security override initiated. Lockdown disengaging in 60 seconds. Ethan's pulse spiked. "Shit. They're overriding the lockdown." Zilara snapped to attention, her body tensing. "We need to leave. Now." Ethan nodded quickly, already scanning the room. They had less than a minute before the doors opened, and security stormed in. Zilara moved toward the emergency escape panel on the far wall, her fingers moving quickly over the controls. Ethan followed, But then, his vision flickered. For a split second, he wasn't in the medical bay anymore. He was in Zilara's mind again. A voice whispered through the bond, soft and distant. "Ethan, what if I don't want this to end?" His breath caught. And then, just like that, the vision was gone. He stared at Zilara, but she wasn't looking at him. She was focused on the escape panel, trying to override the system. Ethan exhaled slowly, his chest tightening. She didn't just want to survive. She wanted to stay connected. The realization hit him harder than any battle he'd ever fought. And for the first time, he wondered, did he want that too? The escape panel hissed open, revealing a maintenance tunnel leading out of the medical bay. Zilara turned to him, her golden eyes full of urgency. "Ethan, come on." Ethan shook off his thoughts and followed her into the tunnel, leaving the medical bay behind. As the door sealed shut behind them, the sound of security forces breaking in echoed from the other side. They had barely escaped in time. But Ethan knew one thing for certain. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The unexpected solution. The maintenance tunnel stretched dark and narrow before them, dimly lit by flickering overhead lights. The air was thick with the scent of old machinery and the faint hum of the station's power systems. Ethan moved quickly, keeping pace with Zilara, who led the way with quiet urgency. Her movements were precise, calculated, but her body still trembled with the residual energy from the incomplete neural bond. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that the bond had changed something in both of them, something deep and unspoken. The way Zilara had looked at him just moments ago, the vulnerability in her eyes, had left a lingering question in his mind. What did she really want from this? But he didn't have time to dwell on that. The security forces would be on them soon, and the station's AI had likely already activated every possible fail-safe to contain the biological anomaly. Zilara's condition was far from stable, and they were running out of time. "Where are we going?" Ethan asked, his voice low but urgent. Zilara's gaze flickered to the maintenance tunnel's far end, where a flickering light revealed an emergency exit. "There's a hidden escape route leading to the outer docking bay. It's my only way out without being detected." Ethan nodded, silently following her through the tight corridor. But something gnawed at him. Her words echoed in his head. "It's my only way out." She wasn't just talking about escaping the station. She was talking about escaping herself. She was running away from the inevitable loss of control. The deeper the bond had connected them, the clearer it had become. Zilara wasn't just afraid of dying. She was terrified of losing herself completely in the mating cycle, and as much as she fought it, there was no escaping it. But as the seconds ticked by, the question lingered. Was he willing to help her? Was he willing to do what needed to be done to make this connection permanent, even at the cost of his own sanity? Zilara's sudden stop broke him from his thoughts. She turned to face him, her golden eyes glowing softly, and for a brief moment, she looked fragile, as if all her defiance had drained from her body. "Ethan," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "there's something I need to tell you before we make it to the docking bay." He met her gaze, curiosity and caution warring in his chest. "What is it?" She hesitated for a moment, clearly struggling with her words. "The neural bond. It's complicated. The more we connect, the more of my mind will merge with yours. You'll begin to feel what I feel, think like I think, until it becomes impossible to separate us." Ethan's heart raced. "You mean, if we finish this bond, I won't just be sharing your thoughts. I'll be you." Zilara nodded, her lips pressing into a tight line. "Yes, if we fully complete the bond, you will carry part of me in your mind. Forever. And if the bond is interrupted before it's completed." She trailed off, the weight of the unsaid words hanging heavy in the air. Ethan's mind spun. What was he getting himself into? Before he could respond, a loud clang echoed from behind them. The sound of boots on metal. Security was getting closer. Zilara's eyes widened, and she immediately grabbed Ethan's arm. "We don't have much time. The docking bay is just ahead, But if we don't finish this bond, we'll both be trapped in a cycle of desperation. I can't risk it. I won't survive without completing the bond." Ethan's thoughts raced. The clock was ticking, and everything felt like it was moving too fast. But then he looked at her, really looked. She wasn't just an alien nurse. She wasn't just an intelligent being with power, fear, and a mysterious agenda. She was a creature, a person, who had lived centuries alone. And for the first time, Ethan realized just how far loneliness had shaped her. "Zilara," he said slowly, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. "I'm not going to let you face this alone. I'll be with you. But only if we do this together, fully together." Her breath caught in her throat, her eyes flashing with something almost unrecognizable. "Relief. You're sure?" she asked, her voice almost pleading. Ethan nodded. "I'm sure." They were at the entrance to the docking bay now, the door in front of them, a clear path to freedom and escape. But Ethan knew there was no escape unless they took the risk. They had no choice but to finish what they had started. Zilara turned to him, her silver eyes glinting in the dim light. "We'll do it now before the security forces arrive. We need to complete the neural bond, Ethan. Only then will we be able to leave this station and escape the danger." Ethan's heart beat harder, faster. He stepped closer to her, his breath shallow. This was it. There was no turning back now. Zilara placed her hands gently on his temples once again, her touch sending an electric shiver through his body. The bond pulsed between them, and the world around them began to blur. The tension, the fear, the urgency, it all melted away into a haze of shared emotions. For a moment, they simply stood there, locked in the bond, their thoughts tangled together. Ethan felt a deep connection with her, deeper than anything he had ever felt. He could sense her loneliness, her fears, her hunger for connection. But there was something else too. Desperation. Regret. "Zilara." Ethan's voice was thick, as if speaking through a fog. "I'm with you. You're not alone anymore." Her breathing stilled for a moment. Then, almost imperceptibly, she nodded. "You are more than just a connection to me now, Ethan. You are my anchor." Their minds fused completely, and the sensation was overwhelming. Images, thoughts, and emotions flooded through him. He was no longer just Ethan Carter, the human captain. He was Zilara, and she was him. He felt her centuries of isolation, her yearning to belong, and the weight of her ancient species' expectations. He also felt her love for the connection they were forging, and the deep, desperate relief of no longer being alone. And then it was over. The bond was complete. The world snapped back into focus, and Ethan found himself standing in the docking bay, Zilara still holding him. He could feel her presence, every part of her lingering in his mind, an unspoken promise. Zilara stepped back slightly, her face pale but peaceful. "We did it, Ethan. You saved me." Ethan didn't know what to say. The flood of emotions was still too new, too overwhelming. But one thing was clear. He couldn't let go of her now. Not ever. The sound of the station alarms sounded far away now, irrelevant. The real danger had passed, and for the first time since this nightmare began, he felt like he wasn't just a soldier or an outsider. He was part of something bigger. "Zilara," he whispered, his voice thick with unspoken emotions, "we're in this together. And no matter what happens next, I'm not letting you go." Zilara's eyes softened, a silent promise in them. "You never have to." The aftermath. The hum of the docking bay's air filters filled the quiet, the only sound besides Ethan's labored breath and the distant footsteps of approaching security forces. He could feel Zilara's presence beside him. Strong, unwavering. It was like a thread tethering them together, weaving their minds into something unbreakable. They stood in the shadows, hidden from view behind a stack of crates and old machinery. The emergency docking bay doors had opened with a sharp hiss, and Ethan knew their escape was seconds away from being compromised. The security forces would be here soon, scouring the bay for any sign of the unauthorized biological disturbance. But now that the bond had been completed, the urgency of their escape felt different. The energy between him and Zilara wasn't just about survival anymore. He could sense her thoughts and feelings as clearly as his own, and she could sense his. The connection wasn't a burden, it was a strange kind of comfort. It was like being tethered to her in a way that no one else could ever understand. "They're coming." Zilara's voice rang in his mind, and he felt the tension in her words as though it were his own. She was trying to stay calm, but he could sense the faint edge of panic creeping in beneath the surface. She had never truly let someone in this way, not like this. He could feel the weight of it pressing on her, just as it pressed on him. The security forces would be here any moment. They had to move, and they had to move fast. Ethan turned to Zilara, their eyes meeting across the dimly lit room. The soft glow of her golden eyes was the only light that illuminated her features in the darkness. But in that moment, he saw more than just her face. He saw her fear, her hope, and an undeniable desperation. "Zilara," he said, his voice low, but with a sense of finality. "I know you're scared. I can feel it. But we're in this together now. We can't let them stop us. We have to finish this." Her lips parted slightly, and Ethan could feel the hesitation in her thoughts. She wasn't used to this, to relying on someone else. But deep down, he could feel her reaching for something. Something she hadn't known she needed until now. She nodded slowly. "I trust you." The words hit him harder than he expected. Trust. It was everything. Ethan stepped forward, reaching for her hand. As their fingers touched, the bond pulsed between them, a wave of raw emotion washing over him. Her fear, her need for connection, her resilience, it all surged into him, filling the spaces of his mind. It wasn't just her thoughts, it was her very essence. Ethan took a deep breath, his heart pounding in his chest. "We'll get through this. Together." Zilara didn't answer with words. Instead, she simply pulled him forward, moving them quickly toward the docking station. They approached the ship that would take them away from the station. It was an older scout ship, nothing fancy, but it would get them out of there. The ship's hull was scarred from countless battles, its markings a symbol of resilience. Ethan could feel the tension rising in the air. This was their last chance. Just as they approached the ramp, the sound of footsteps behind them echoed through the docking bay. Security had arrived. "Freeze." A voice rang out from behind them, and the heavy footsteps grew louder. Ethan instinctively pulled Zilara closer, his hand gripping hers as they reached the ramp. The security officers were closing in fast. He could feel Zilara's nervous energy building. But there was something else too, something darker. Her fear had morphed into a resolve. She was ready to fight, to do whatever it took to keep them safe. Ethan glanced back. "Zilara, get in the ship. Now." But she didn't move. Instead, she turned to face the security officers, her eyes glowing with an inner fire. The golden glow was intensifying, and Ethan could sense the energy building around her. It was the bond. The connection between them had unlocked something inside her. Something dangerous. "Zilara." "No." Ethan's voice was sharp, but she didn't turn. Instead, she stepped forward, standing between Ethan and the security officers, her presence filling the room. The officers froze, confusion and fear flashing in their eyes. The power radiating off Zilara was overwhelming, and the bond between them made it feel like her energy was pulsing through his veins too. Her voice rang out, calm, but with a strength that Ethan had never heard before. "You will not stop us. We are leaving." For a split second, the officers hesitated. But then one of them raised his weapon, and the tension in the air snapped. Fire. Zilara moved faster than the eye could follow. In a single fluid motion, she reached out with her hand, and the officer was thrown back against the wall, slamming into it with a sickening thud. Ethan's heart raced. He had never seen her like this powerful. The bond had amplified her abilities, made her more than just the nurse he had met days ago. She was an unstoppable force. The remaining officers, clearly stunned, took a step back. But Zilara wasn't finished. Her eyes glowed brighter as she raised her other hand, a wave of energy emanating from her. Ethan grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the ship. "Zilara, we need to go. Now." She nodded, her breath ragged, and the energy around her dissipated. The remaining officers were either unconscious or too afraid to do anything. The ramp to the ship closed behind them with a sharp hiss, sealing them off from the chaos of the station. Ethan quickly slid into the pilot's seat, and Zilara joined him, sitting beside him. The ship's systems hummed to life, and the stars outside the viewport blurred into view. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. They were finally out of danger, but neither of them could shake the intensity of what had just happened. The ship lifted off from the station, the stars pulling them into the vast, endless void. And as the station faded into the distance, Ethan turned to Zilara. He could still feel the bond between them, stronger than ever. He opened his mouth to speak, but before he could say anything, she spoke first, her voice soft, but filled with the weight of everything they had just been through. "Thank you, Ethan." The words felt heavy, but they also felt like a beginning. Ethan nodded, his chest tight. "You don't have to thank me." He paused, his gaze drifting back to the stars outside the viewport. "We're in this together, always." Zilara's golden eyes softened as she reached over, placing her hand on his. It was a simple gesture, but it spoke volumes. And for the first time since their journey began, Ethan truly felt like he had found something. Someone worth fighting for. The path forward. The stars outside the viewport stretched into long, silent streaks of light as Ethan and Zilara hurtled through the endless void. The sound of the ship's engines hummed steadily, a comforting contrast to the turbulent emotions swirling between them. The weight of everything that had just happened was still settling in. They had just escaped a life-or-death situation on the station. Security forces, biological risks, a powerful alien mating cycle, all of it had been thrown at them in a matter of days. And yet, here they were, still alive, still together. But Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Zilara sat quietly beside him, her golden eyes distant as she stared at the blinking stars outside. He could feel her mind, a constant presence now, a companion in his thoughts. The bond between them was more than just physical. It had woven their very essences together. She wasn't just a nurse or a stranger anymore. She was part of him, as much as he was part of her. Her presence felt like a quiet echo in his mind, and it was strange, almost comforting. It was as if he wasn't alone anymore, not truly. He knew her fears, her hopes, her deepest thoughts, and she knew his. He turned to her, his gaze soft but intense. "Zilara, are you okay?" Her lips quivered as she exhaled, her eyes momentarily flickering with a mixture of emotions. Regret, relief, and something deeper, something he couldn't quite name. "I'm not sure." Her voice was soft, but there was a rawness to it. The bond has made things clearer, but it has also made things more complicated. Ethan furrowed his brow. "Complicated? In what way?" Zilara turned her head slightly to meet his gaze. "Before we completed the bond, I was fighting it, fighting the urge to connect. But now that it's finished, I can feel everything. Your thoughts, your feelings, just as you feel mine. And while I understand you better than anyone I've ever known, it's also overwhelming." Ethan felt her struggle, a deep, almost painful conflict. He knew what that felt like. It was like having a part of yourself exposed, raw and vulnerable. "I can't imagine how that feels," Ethan said softly. He reached out and placed his hand gently over hers, a gesture that seemed to ground them both in the midst of the storm of emotions. "But we're in this together now. We don't have to fight it." Zilara's eyes softened, and for the first time, Ethan saw a glimmer of peace in her expression. She nodded, but her voice trembled as she spoke again. You don't know what it's like to never truly belong to anyone, to never find a true connection. I've been alone for so long, Ethan. The bond. It was both a relief and a fear. But now, I'm afraid. Afraid of what I might lose. Afraid of losing myself in you. Ethan's heart clenched. He could feel her words, feel the depth of her loneliness and the weight of her fear. It was almost as if she had lived her entire existence on the edge of something she could never reach. The bond had given her a glimpse of what it was like to truly connect, to truly belong. But now she was terrified of losing herself in the process. Ethan squeezed her hand, his voice steady. Zilara, we're not going to lose each other. I'm not going to let that happen. I don't know what this bond means, or what it will become, but I know one thing for sure. She looked at him, her golden eyes searching his face for the answer. You're not alone anymore, he said, his voice thick with conviction. We're both here, and I'm not going anywhere. For a moment, there was a long silence between them. Then, slowly, Zilara nodded, her gaze softening. She breathed deeply, as though letting go of the burden she had been carrying for so long. Ethan could feel the shift in the air between them, the trust, the bond. It was real, and it was growing stronger. But despite the moment of peace, Ethan knew they weren't out of danger yet. There were still many questions left unanswered. Questions about the bond, about what would come next. They had escaped the station, but they hadn't escaped the consequences of their actions. He turned to the ship's console, bringing up a series of scanning systems. We need to figure out where we're going next. The station's AI is probably still tracking us, and we need to be off their radar as quickly as possible. Zilara's eyes flickered toward the console, and then she stood, moving toward the navigation controls. I can help with that, she said quietly. I know of a safe haven, a place where we can lay low for a while. It's an old Velferi outpost, abandoned for centuries, hidden from any major fleets. Ethan raised an eyebrow. That sounds promising, but why hasn't anyone found it? Zilara turned to him, her expression pensive. Because it's shielded, hidden by ancient technology that even the most advanced systems can't detect. Only those who know the coordinates can find it. Ethan looked at her with new respect. You really do know how to survive. Zilara gave a small, weary smile. It's not about survival. It's about hiding. Ethan sat back in his seat, processing everything. The bond had changed both of them. It had taken them from strangers to something else, something deeper. And as much as he feared what the future might hold, he also knew that he had never been more certain of anything in his life than this. They belonged together. He glanced over at her again, his thoughts shifting. We're going to make it through this, Zilara. I don't know how, but we will. Together. Zilara met his gaze, her golden eyes full of something that looked like hope. She nodded, her voice soft but strong. Together. For the first time, the stars outside didn't seem so cold. They were a path forward. But the road ahead wasn't easy. There were still forces out there, threats they didn't fully understand. The bond between them had opened a door, but that door led to a whole new world of challenges and dangers. The unknown stretched out before them, vast and mysterious, but one thing was clear. As long as they had each other, they could face whatever came next. Ethan took a deep breath, gripping the ship's controls. It was time to move forward.